Hi everyone, I'm Ben. Welcome back to my channel. Somehow we've gotten to the middle of March without me telling you what I read in February, so better late than never. We are here to correct that today. And I had a pretty good reading month, not just because I read probably the most books I've ever read in a single month before. I also went to a few really cool book-related events, and I think I will tell you about those first. The first of these was a stage production of Olga Tokarczuk's Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Complicity Theatre. It was a really good show. It was pretty long and I was in quite an uncomfortable seat, but I did really enjoy it. The setup of the show was that we got quite a few monologues from Janina, and I think the text from these were lifted straight from the book, obviously with some edits to condense them in length. But she delivered it a bit like a stand-up show or a talk from The Moth. If you don't know what The Moth is, it's a bit like TED Talks, but instead of trying to be educational, they're sort of personal stories and they hold events around the world. But yeah, Janina delivered these monologues and then kind of joined in with the action going on behind and around her and interacted with the other characters at certain points. I really enjoyed it. When I read this book, I liked but didn't really love it as much as a lot of other readers do. But it has sat with me and it's sort of grown in my mind over time. And I think the stage show really brought to life for me a bit more of the comedy. I think the performances really added a lot and I got much more of a sense of the characters and the funny situations. But it was obviously still darkly comic. It is a murder mystery at the end of the day. Yeah, if that show comes to a theatre near you anytime soon, I would highly recommend it. It's really worth a watch. The other event that I went to was at my local bookshop, and it was a book launch for Hungry Ghosts by Kevin Jared Hosein. Kevin is a Caribbean author from Trinidad. This is his first adult novel. He's written a few young adult novels that have been published in Trinidad before. But this has been spoken about as an early contender for the Booker Prize, which must be very exciting for him and exciting for me as a reader because I can't wait to get into it. The setup of the event was that he was interviewed by Nikesh Shukla, who is also an author, just about the book and its background. And then there was a chance to ask questions. And normally I'm very shy at events like this because I get embarrassed very easily. But I did ask a question because I'd read an interview with Kevin in The Guardian that I found really interesting. And I asked him about whether video games were an inspiration for his writing and how it influenced him. And it was interesting. He said that like an early epiphany he had was when he finished a Final Fantasy game, and when the credits were rolling he realised that someone had been a writer for that game, and he hadn't put two and two together to realise that someone had to write the stories for these games. It was one of the things that inspired him to write. It's really interesting to me that there does seem to be a recent newfound appreciation for Trinidadian literature. There have been some really strong authors lately like Monique Roffey and Lisa Allen Agostini, whose books have performed well in UK book prizes. And this looks to be another one to add to that list, so I am very excited to read it sometime soon. I do have quite a few more book-related events coming up this year, including going to see A Little Life in April, which I am in equal measure very excited and very nervous about going to see. I think it is going to be an absolutely gripping, wild ride that may emotionally devastate me and horrify me, but we'll see, and I will tell you about that and the other things that are going on in my wrap-ups as well. But on to the books that I read in February. In total I read 9 books, which I'm not sure I've done before, these ones. That said, quality over quantity. We're not here just for the numbers. They were also a load of very good books. I was wondering why I read so much, and I think it's a combination of a couple of things. One is maybe a bit of a cheat that there are a few books in here that are literally one sitting or one day reads. And the other thing is that I have so far in 2023 been a bit ill, and that's at times made it really hard for me to work. I've been in quite a lot of pain. I've been sleeping quite irregular hours, and so I have had, in between those moments or in an attempt to distract myself, a bit more time to read. So I think I've just got through more books have helped me through quite a tough time. The first book I finished in February was one that I talked about in my January wrap-up because I was quite a way through it, but I finished it pretty early on, and that was Still Life by Sarah Winman. And my gosh, this is so good. It's such a absorbing, spellbinding comfort read. I really, really enjoyed the process of reading it. It's billed as a story about a friendship between a younger man, Ulysses, and an older woman, Evelyn. And although that friendship does feature, they sort of meet at the start and then we sort of work our way through the years as they come back together towards the end. I don't think the book was about that. For me, this book was about unconventional family and unconventional love. There are a lot of loving connections between characters in this novel, but very few of them are your straightforward romantic love affairs. A majority of the book follows Ulysses. He inherits basically a bed and breakfast in Florence and decides to move there. And he takes with him his daughter, who is not his daughter, and his esoteric older male friend, Cressy. And they live out a pretty happy life with its ups and downs. People come in and out of their life throughout sort of the 40 years that the book spans. I felt like I was watching a really top quality BBC drama. That's how reading this book felt. And a lot of the reviews and headlines about this book are that it's one that is hopeful and fills you with joy. And that is correct, but I wouldn't want to missell it as a completely happy book. This is not fuzzy and lovely. There are things that are sad that happen in it. But yeah, Winman manages to toe this line where sad things happen and it makes you have a really emotional response, but it never feels gratuitous or manipulative. It all feels very earned. And I really appreciated that about this book. I would really highly recommend reading this one. I think this is actually a great pick as a present if you've got any friends or family who love books like A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles or All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. This is a great book in that sort of genre of comfort reads that are also just bloody good. I'm going to bundle together the three next books because they are all Ottessa Moshfegh books. So I read McGlue, Eileen, and her short story collection Homesick for Another World. And I read these because I was starting a bit of a reading project for a video to read all of Ottessa Moshfegh's books because I realised I really like the idea of Ottessa Moshfegh and I have somehow acquired all of her books over the years, but I have only read My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which I really liked, and I thought it was time to sort that out and just work through all of the other ones, take in her canon as a whole, and have some reflections on it. The plan was to read all of Moshfegh's books in February, and I was going to call it Moshfeghuary, and it was going to be like a new annual event. Everyone was going to join in, but basically I got started, and then I lost the will to carry on. Not because they were bad, but because it was just a bit much all in one go. So I am going to save my thoughts on these for a dedicated video all about Moshfegh. But one thing I will say is that I was a little let down by McGlue. I saw Simon Savage had recently read it. Hi, Simon. And he mentioned that the ending of McGlue really was a sort of wallop across the face. And I didn't get that at all. I found the whole thing very confusing, to be totally honest. And the ending was a little limp for me. I wanted more. But anyway, that's a spoiler for a future video. Okay, my next book. If you are someone who has subscribed because you saw my International Booker Prize predictions video or my Women's Prize related content and you are into your high literature, the next book is not going to be for you. But I did read it and it was very comforting. And it was Heartstopper, well, volumes 1 and 2 of Heartstopper. So while I was ill, I kind of wanted some comfort television as well as some comfort reading. So I was going to watch Heartstopper and I decided to first read the graphic novel by Alice Osman. And I saw it was 99p on the Kindle store. So I downloaded and read that on Kindle. And reading a graphic novel on Kindle was a surprisingly enjoyable reading experience. I didn't think it would be. I downloaded it, I devoured it very, very quickly. And then I started watching the TV show and realised that season 1 covered both books 1 and 2, and so I ended up getting my hands on a copy of volume 2 and reading that very quickly as well. I actually read these in between the Ottessa Moshfegh books, and it was a very strange feeling jumping from this sort of absurd graphic and at times sick minds of Moshfegh's characters into this fuzzy-wuzzy teenage gay love story. I have to say, I really enjoyed this. I'd been skeptical, unfairly judgmental for a while, but it was just a really lovely story, and it resonated with me quite a lot. I think I was a closeted rugby playing teen. I mean, you wouldn't think it to look at me, but I played until everyone else grew, and I did not grow, and then I had to stop playing rugby because I kept getting injured. But yeah, it was just lovely. There's lots of characters that are drawn as in like well developed. To be honest, that didn't come through massively in the TV show. I thought the TV show was a little bit too CBeebies for me. The acting and the dialogue in particular didn't work brilliantly. I think what I liked is that there wasn't too much manufactured drama. You know, in a lot of romance stories, you get one character wants to be with the other, and then just when that person decides that they too want to be in the relationship, something happens and the first character doesn't want to be with the second one after all, and then you go in this cycle of like it never actually happening. Whereas this, I think, didn't have that. It developed quite naturally. It all felt quite real to me. So yeah, I am going to read volumes 3, 4 and eventually 5. They're a nice little break from some of the heavier literature. Then we move on to a very different queer story, and that is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This is the story of Miri and Leah. Leah's just come back from an expedition on a submarine that went wrong somehow. And we don't know what's gone wrong, but she's a changed person. And we've got these dual narratives, kind of two timelines, where we see in alternate chapters Miri's experience of the new Leah at home and the strange things she's doing. And we flash back to Leah's perspective while she is on the submarine, where it inexplicably goes wrong. And behind both of these narratives, we've got a slightly shady organisation that employs Leah and sends her on her marine biology trips. This is a very strange book in many ways. Over the course of Miri's narrative, we see Leah transform into... Well, actually, I'm not going to say because I don't want to spoil it. And we join Miri as she sort of essentially reflects on losing her partner and grieving for Leah because she is not the same person. She's come back very changed. I actually really liked both stories in this. It's often the case that when there's a dual narrative, you might like one more than the other and you're sort of itching to get back to the one that you like. But I enjoyed both of these. I think Miri was probably the more captivating narrator, but because of the mystery element in what was going on in Leah's timeline, I still was like really interested in reading that. I think when you've got a mystery at the heart of a piece of storytelling, it can be very hard to build that up and then deliver something that's quite satisfying at the end. You get it a lot in TV with like the mystery box show and people being very dissatisfied by the revelations of what was at the heart of a show like Lost. And it's a very difficult line to tread because you want to give enough that the reader feels satisfied, but you don't want to give the wrong answer. And I think this book actually plays a bit of a blinder because it doesn't just end abruptly. We don't get left with it completely in our imaginations what could have been behind this. We do get some crumbs and we learn a bit about what's going on, but it's not overly described, so there is a lot of room for your own interpretation. And I think that was really smart of Julia Armfield. I think she's got a cracking imagination and I'm really interested to see what else she does. Right. When I read The Overstory at the very start of the year, I thought, my gosh, maybe I've read the best book I'll read all year already. However, I have now read Riambel by Priya Hein, and just wow. Oh, I sound like Owen Wilson. This book is unbelievable, and I'm not sure if part of that is because I picked it up on a whim. I'd never heard of it before, so I went in with no expectations of what it was or what it was about or how it was written or who the author was, but it just absolutely blew my socks off. This is such an accomplished, amazing debut novel from this author who's from Mauritius. I think it won a prize as a sort of unpublished manuscript. I think that's right. And then weirdly, it was published in French back in September last year and hasn't been published in English until January this year. But the French was the translation and the English was the original. I'm not sure why publication happened in the way that it did, but I'm just glad it was published. This is a very short novel, and we follow our 15-year-old protagonist, Noemi, who lives in Riambel, which is a town in Mauritius. Noemi lives in a slum, which is just across the road from these big, grand French colonial houses, which the moneyed French people come and spend time in at certain points in the year. And we get this sort of straightforward narrative of Noemi going to work with her mother and interacting with some of the people that live in this home. It's told in short chapters, almost vignettes. There's a lot of white space on the page. And that narrative is quite straightforward, but inserted in between these chapters is a cacophony of other voices, like snippets from Mauritian history, from a sister who we don't know what's happened to. There are Mauritian recipes, and I know recipes included in a novel can be a little controversial, but it's so clever because it weaves in this sort of commentary about how things get adapted for the white people when cooking for them. And this builds this really interesting picture, not just of what is happening to Noemi and the structures that she encounters in Mauritius today, but how these build up into a bigger picture of Mauritius's whole history and the way it deals with race and class structures, its colonial past, the intersectionality of these things with gender dynamics in the society. The book is just so meticulously constructed that you jump between these different scenes and you get whiplash of like hopefulness, and then that gets swatted down by a really startling piece of information about Mauritian history, or you get Noemi's internal hopeful thoughts about what she's going to achieve in her life and how she thinks she can beat the odds. And then in the next moment, her mother just sort of slaps that down by starting in the middle of a scene where she's being told to just get on with the cleaning. I found the language in this so beautiful, but also incredibly precise. It is very rare that I read a book and get goosebumps when I realise what the author is doing. And this happened more than once while I was reading this. There is a moment in this book where the narration changes from Noemi's perspective over to the perspective of some other person, and you don't realise at first because it's not obviously stated. And when I realised that the new narrator was the white man taking control of the narrative, and that sort of endemic societal issue was playing out in the construction of the book, oh my God, I had to stop reading and just think about how amazing Priya Hein's mind is to do that in her novel. I was absolutely blown away. This is such a brilliant book. It is heartbreaking, and I would massively encourage anyone to read this. I really hope it gets picked up by all of the prizes this year. It is so accomplished. I love it. It probably will be one of my favourite books of the year. And it's got a bloody gorgeous cover, which does not hurt in the slightest. Finally, I read Lark Ascending by Silas House. I don't think this has been published in the UK, but I did manage to order a copy online. This is another book with a great cover, for starters, but it is a near future dystopian novel about a world where fires have devastated much of America, and extremist sort of fundamentalist groups, the American one called the Fundies, have taken control of huge swathes of society and imposed quite harsh, controlling, draconian rules on people. And we follow a family that are escaping that when they can no longer get by in the US. And they take a boat over towards Ireland, where they see a hopeful future because it's one of the last places where people can live freely and there is enough food for everyone, and it's a bit of a promised land. But of course, all does not go well, and Lark, who is a member of this family, finds himself all alone, basically fending for himself. There was a lot I liked about this book. I think there is something very resonant about reading a story where people are desperate enough to take a very small boat across the Atlantic Ocean, given the current UK political climate and discourse around small boats crossing the Channel from France. I guess this both builds empathy, but I am also primed to feel a lot for these characters at the moment because of the situation here. There is also an adorable dog featured in this book, and a number of the chapters are told from the dog's perspective. One of these chapters was very reminiscent for me of the first 10 minutes of Up. You get this sort of snapshot lifetime story that just breaks your heart, sets the character up, and you just fall in love with him very quickly. There is also a gay love story baked into this, but it's not one that is the main point of the novel, and it's not one that ends very happily, which again is another thing that, like, given some of the current rhetoric and people's rights being rolled back, as a gay person, I found that quite scary and troubling and sad and all too realistic. However, I went into it pretty blind, having not read anything from Silas House before, and the book started off for me very simply and beautifully written, and I was really enjoying it, but it did turn into quite a straightforward hero's journey, and I think by about 2/3 of the way through, I did feel like I was reading a YA book, which might make it more appealing to you if you are considering reading this book. But for me, it just meant that things were quite simplistic. The characters weren't super deep. Like, some of their motivations made sense, but they were all pretty mechanically obvious motivations. And I felt like they were doing the things they were doing to get from A to B, which is fine. It works well, but it makes this not a stellar standout read for me. I'm glad I read it. I did enjoy it. I just think I had slightly higher hopes. Right, that's everything. All 9 books. I would be really interested to know if you read any of these and what you thought of them, or any recommendations, I guess, based on the fact that I blooming loved Still Life and Riambel. If you know of any books that are similar to those, do let me know. I'm always open to a recommendation, although my reading schedule is pretty blocked up trying to get through some of these Women's Prize nominated books. And I may try and slip in some of the International Booker long-listed books once that's announced. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you want to see more of my content. But until next time, toodles!